Please welcome Richard Ward.
Good morning. It's great to be here today. Jackie, thank you for that kind introduction, and I look forward to the opportunity to speaking with you. Today I'll be talking about the range of threats utilities face, how the electric sector approaches grid security, and how the sector partners with the government to strengthen the security posture of the electric grid and, by extension, the nation. The electric grid is critical infrastructure. It's critical to national security. It's critical to the life, health, and safety of all Americans. It's also critical to the economic security of the nation. Everybody in this room understands all too well that you can't run your company or sell or move your product without electricity. Utilities understand that, and they take their responsibility as owners and operators of critical infrastructure very seriously. Utilities plan for a number of threats. Threats include natural disasters such as hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, and ice storms, as well as malicious events such as cyber and physical attacks, or some combination of the two. Threats can also be economic in nature, such as data breaches that can lead to the potential loss of employee or customer-sensitive information. I know this is a major concern to a number of you in the room, including the utilities. And while we've seen several high-profile attacks in the public and private sector over the last couple of years, what really keeps utilities up at night are attacks on critical infrastructure, such as the electric grid, that could impact the delivery of electricity. This is a much more serious matter. The threat actors for the utilities can literally range from squirrels to nation states, with pretty much everybody else in between, including hackers, sophisticated terrorists and criminal organizations, as well as copper thieves. Utilities have even been known to face drunk hunters frustrated by failed hunting outings, and they take their frustrations out at substations and transmission lines. Utilities have seen it all, and so how do they prepare for all these threats? Individual utilities cannot be 100% secure from all hazards. To effectively combat evolving threats, the industry constantly evaluates the different types of scenarios it faces, the potential damage that can occur to manage these risks. And as adversaries and threats evolve, so does the risk and security posture of the industry. One other significant challenge that the sector faces is the daily barrage of media coverage that on any one of these threats could take out the grid and plunge the nation into darkness. These stories inevitably conclude that the sector and the government are not prepared and they don't take these threats seriously. The industry is routinely fighting back Hollywood movie scripts. Think Ocean's 11 with its EMP attack, the Bond film Skyfall, or the recent movie Black Hat, both including sophisticated cyber attacks. Even today, renowned journalist Ted Koppel, best known as the former anchor of ABC News Nightline for 25 years, is out with a book titled Lights Out: A Cyber Attack, A Nation Unprepared, Surviving the Aftermath. Up until recently, the industry was not comfortable talking about security issues because, and I think rightly so, they didn't want a target on their back. However, over time, the industry realized if they weren't talking about what they were doing, then the perception was they weren't doing anything. And by remaining silent, others started to fill the void. Following Superstorm Sandy, the industry committed to being more proactive to telling its story. The reason was simple. The industry and the government had an obligation to reassure the public that the issues were being addressed in a very serious, thoughtful, and coordinated way. With that said, how does the electric sector approach grid security? The sector takes a multi-pronged approach. I refer to them as the three legs of the stool. They include, one, the North American Reliability Corporation, NERC's, critical infrastructure protection standards. Two is partnerships with the government that I've started to outline. And three is incident response. Let's take these one at a time. First, the electric sector and the nuclear sector are subject to mandatory and reliable cybersecurity and physical security standards. These standards help to ensure the reliable operation of the electric grid. Entities found in violation of these standards are subject to fines up to $1 million per day per violation. The sector is really proud of these standards. They provide a baseline level of security. They are the good blocking and tackling, the good hygiene that we all need to be doing. However, as we have learned with standards, they can improve the security posture of the nation and as the grid, but alone are insufficient to the challenging of the evolving threat environment. Standards, by definition, cannot keep up. For example, if we were to mandate a 10-foot fence around every substation, the adversary would simply have to bring a 12-foot ladder. Now, we want them to have to bring their 12-foot ladder. We want them to have to bring their A or their B game, not their D or their F game, but we don't pretend that standards in and of themselves equal security. The second leg of the stool is partnerships. While standards are really good at protecting against known threats and vulnerabilities, it is partnerships through close coordination between the sector and the government that allows utilities to maintain a high level of reliability against new and evolving threats. Why? Because protecting critical infrastructure is a shared responsibility. The government has a standing army, intelligence gathering capabilities, a law enforcement mandate, and utilities are really good at running their own systems and keeping the lights on. That is why the industry and the government must work together. So how do we knit together the owners and operators of critical infrastructure with the units of government that can help make critical infrastructure more secure? It's taking place on a couple different levels. As I mentioned, at the national level with the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council, the ESCC, I'm going to go into a little bit more depth on them in a moment. With respect to the sharing of threat data and analysis, the level of coordination between the Electricity Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the ISAC, and the Department of Homeland Security's National Cybersecurity and Communication Integration Center, the NCIC, is improving every day. And finally, as I think you all know, the most important partnerships are taking place at the state and local level between utilities, customers, you all, and local law enforcement and local FBI field offices. The final leg of the stool is incident response. Our sector understands better than anyone that whether it's an act of God or an act of war, we can't protect everything from everything. At some point, whether it's a storm or a physical or cyber attack, something's going to happen, and we need to be prepared to respond and get the lights back on as safely and quickly as possible. There's an Eisenhower quote that I'm always reminded of: plans are useless, planning is priceless. That's why utilities continuously plan for a range of incidents. Utilities are constantly managing risk by understanding that something could go wrong and planning to make sure a bad day doesn't become a catastrophic one. If you look at the electric grid, it's one big machine with thousands of owners and operators. Everyone has to work really well together. Through preparing for storms and our mutual assistance networks, the electric sector has decades of experience working together in response to incidents. For example, the electric sector's response to Superstorm Sandy had utilities from as far away as California, here in Texas, and Canada sending bucket trucks and line crews into the affected regions to get the lights back on. More than 80 companies and tens of thousands of line crews responded. It's in the culture of our sector. It's in our DNA. And this is starting to translate really, really well into the security space on such issues as cyber and physical security threats, supply chain management, insider threats, spare equipment programs, and the transportation under dark skies of hard to move equipment such as transformers. An example of the industry's commitment is next month, NERC will conduct the industry-wide grid security exercise known as GridX. This is the third one. GridX will bring together 280 organizations and 2,400 participants from across the industry, the government, and our partners in Canada and Mexico. GridX also includes an executive tabletop for senior executive from the industry as well as senior government officials to work through incident response protocols to widespread outages. Again, emergency preparedness, response, and recovery is in the sector's DNA. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day why the lights go out, but we will do everything we can to get them back on. I'd like to pivot back to the ESCC. The ESCC serves as the primary liaison between the electric sector and the federal government for coordinating efforts to prepare for and respond to national-level incidents or threats to critical infrastructure. What makes the ESCC unique is that it's CEO-led. In fact, in less than a year from inception, the National Infrastructure Advisory Council, NIAC, which is an organization that was stood up by President Bush following 9/11 to inform the Office of the President of critical infrastructure issues, released a report lauding that the ESCC was the model for how critical infrastructure sectors can more effectively partner with the government. So what does that mean? While the ESCC is not operational, in other words, it will not get in the way of utilities' efforts to respond to an incident. But what we really see as a difference is the executives and senior government officials' ability to come together and solve big problems quickly, especially in the middle of a crisis. Only CEOs and senior government officials can make the necessary decisions, such as cutting red tape and removing barriers. Though based on relationships in Sandy, we have seen this model work really, really well, and since then we've been working to perfect it and institutionalize it. The ESCC is a 30-member body consisting of utility CEOs and trade association leaders representing all segments of the electric sector. The ESCC is comprised of a leadership body of 3 co-chairs, one from each of the main trade organizations, the American Public Power Association, the Edison Electric Institute, and the National Rural Cooperatives Association. On the government side, you have senior government officials from the White House, DOE, DHS, DOD, FERC, and the FBI. They generally meet at the deputy secretary level, and these folks get together 3 times a year. The CEOs and government officials agreed to focus on 4 main areas. 1, the deployment of tools and technology to improve the industry and government's situational awareness. 2, to improve the information flow and access to security threat information among public and private sector entities. In other words, making sure the right people get the right information at the right time. One initiative I'd like to highlight is the deployment of a suite of tools by the Pacific Northwest National Lab, the Cyber Risk Information Sharing Program, CRISP, which is bolstering the sector and the government's situational awareness. CRISP enables the sharing of cyber threat data among government, the labs, the ISAC, and industry stakeholders, while supporting machine-to-machine threat mitigation. Cyber threat information shared through CRISP is helping to inform important security decisions, not just among participating utilities, but all ES-ISAC members. Number 3, the ESCC has implemented a playbook under incident response, They've instituted a playbook that provides a framework for senior industry and government executives to communicate with each other to support response and recovery efforts. We've also developed a public affairs annex that provides industry and government external affairs officials the ability to work together, plan and create messaging with each other before, during, and after events. The ESCC playbook and the public affairs annex are exercised regularly and will be featured prominently in GridX 3 next month. Number 4 is cross-sector coordination. The electric sector is often described as the most critical of critical infrastructure sectors, and while it is true that the other sectors depend on a reliable supply of electricity for their operations, the electric sector is dependent on them as well. Utilities need water to cool their systems and to create steam to spin generating equipment, telecommunications to operate the grid, financial services to trade their product, and transportation and pipeline systems to move the fuel they use. So in other words, our adversaries have a lot of ways to attack the industry short of disrupting power. Given the interdependencies, the ESCC has dedicated CEOs to lead an outreach effort to the communications, transportation, financial services, water, and downstream gas sectors to improve planning and responses to major incidents, to better understand and protect our interdependencies, and to share information more effectively. One last point I'd like to make on cross-sector coordination. At the moment, this is an electric sector-led initiative. But the ESCC is working with the other sectors and the government to formalize another NIAC recommendation to form a strategic infrastructure executive council. The SIEC would include the other lifeline sectors I outlined, the corresponding sector-specific government agencies, and would report to the President of the United States. While there are challenges ahead in forming the SIEC, overall there's a common understanding among the lifeline sectors that we need to improve strategic executive level coordination among the critical infrastructure sectors that represent the nation's economy and security. In wrapping up, utilities know that they cannot protect every single grid asset from Mother Nature's fury or malicious events. The challenges the electric sector face are diverse and dynamic. A robust electric grid is essential to the American way of life and to the nation's economic and national security. That's why the sector is committed to having the best standards in place. It will continue to strengthen its government and law enforcement partnerships and will continue to make investments and take action to make the grid stronger, more reliable, and more resilient in the face of any threat. For more information on the ESCC, we have a brochure that's available at electricitysubsector.org that contains a lot of the background information that I think is helpful if you're interested. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you. I can't see. Thank you.